The other big topic that will be touched on by the Home Secretary later on today is violence against women, and I hope you don't mind that we devote the rest of our time together to dealing with this particular topic. She's expected to say that she's redoubling her efforts to ensure women and girls feel safer. Do you accept the fact that in this country we have a problem with violence against women?
Oh, yes, I think we all accept that. And that's why earlier this summer we published a Violence Against Women and Girls strategy, why we commissioned the Inspector for Constabulary to look at the policing of violence against women and girls. We had a report on that earlier this summer. Obviously, over the last couple of years, I've been policing minister, and we've done a lot of work in this area, particularly concentrating, for example, on domestic murder and domestic violence. And I've been leading the work in the government on the regrettably, disgracefully low conviction rates that we have around rape and sexual assault. So there's been a lot of work that's been ongoing. But look, we still have a problem in this country that's been encapsulated in the response to some of the horrible murders, not least Sarah Everard and Sabina Nessa, that we've seen over the last couple of weeks, to which we as a government have to respond. And the fact that there are too many women and girls out there who just feel unsafe in the public realm does demand that we constantly increase and reinforce our efforts to make sure that they and everybody else feel safe.
Sure, but this has, let's be fair about it, this has happened on your watch. The Conservatives have been in power since 2010. So rather than judging you on the promises that you're making right now, shouldn't we be judging you on that record that you have just mentioned? Rape convictions at a low. They have dropped so significantly over the past 5 years that when the rape review came out in June of this year, the Victims Commissioner, Vera Baird, said this: what we are witnessing is the decriminalisation of rape. Why should anyone trust the Conservatives to be able to sort this out?
Well, look, we have obviously apologised profoundly for that fall. The reasons behind it are complicated and to do with issues of disclosure in court and a loss of confidence, if you like, between the police and the CPS about dealing with those cases. What I think people want to see is that we are very focused on this issue, and we've pledged to try and drive those numbers up. And as I say, I'm leading that task force. We've been doing that for the last few months to try and restore that institutional confidence, if you like, and people coming forward. Now, I would say that during that same period, the confidence of people to come forward and report that crime has increased very significantly. So we've seen a big rise in reporting over the last 4 or 5 years. We have to respond to that operationally and make sure that more of those cases to get into court. But it's worth bearing in mind that they're just not. And again, as you say, in the rape review, ministers collectively said they were deeply ashamed. Understandable, given the fact since 2016-17, the volume of cases prosecuted has dropped by 60%. The amount of convictions that we're securing has further dropped. Women do not feel safe on the streets. Honestly, right now, for the Conservatives to describe themselves as the party of law and order would be somewhat hubristic, wouldn't it? I don't think so. I mean, I think that's unfair, right? I mean, we are obviously trying to propose a strong package of messages which will give people a sense of security in the public realm, women and girls, obviously, primary amongst those groups. The Prime Minister came into office, 2 years ago, and having been a crime-fighting mayor in London with a proud history, I have to say, of dealing with violence against women and girls, we published at City Hall the first ever strategy to deal with this issue in the country and in a major capital city around the world. This has been a thread of activity for him, and I have to say,
that's great.
Over more than a decade.
Back in June, you had the opportunity to actually do something about it. Yep, it was in terms of an opposition day, but you voted against the full rollout of Section 28, which would allow for the cross-examination of vulnerable witnesses to be pre-recorded rather than take place in court. You also voted against making street harassment a specific crime. You had an opportunity to do something about it, admittedly presented by the Labour Party, but rather than hold your nose and do it, you voted against it.
No, I mean, again, I think you're mischaracterising the nature of those debates in the House. And by the way, what happens in the House of Commons very often has little to do with what actually happens out there on the street. So, for example, on your Section 28 point, we have rolled out Section 28 for vulnerable victims to every single Crown Court in the land, and we are at the moment carefully rolling it out in these cases to a specific number of Crown Courts to make sure that it works and it embeds. Because, of course, Section 28, while it is obviously of use for victims who feel vulnerable to give their testimony early, it does present cross-examination problems later down the line. Now, we need to make sure that in the interests of justice that we roll that out in a proportionate and a fair way rather than just a blanket easy solution. And it's worth remembering, Neil, that these are very, very complicated and difficult crimes, some of the most difficult to investigate and prosecute. And while it's easy for the Labour Party to make these big, bold claims, we need to be focused on results. And that means
no one is denying that these crimes are difficult to prosecute, Minister. No one is denying that. But the reason it is so difficult to prosecute is because of the cuts that you have made to the system. Since 2010, the CPS has faced a 25% budget cut, 30% reduction in staff. Police forces in England and Wales have lost 22,000 officers between March 2010 and March 2018. You're building them back up again, but fair enough, they're still historically low. The Ministry of Justice has seen its budget cut by 25% up until 2019-2020. Those are the actions that you have taken, and we are seeing the outcomes.
No, I don't think that's fair, and I wouldn't connect the two. I mean, obviously, for the first...
Robert Buckland connected the two.
Hold on.
The previous Justice Secretary connected the two. Like all parts of the public service, big choices were made in the last decade because of the position that we all faced economically, and that cuts were a factor, I think, is self-evidently the case. Robert Buckland said that.
Well, I'm afraid I disagree with him, and I can point you to an example, right? When the Prime Minister and I were at City Hall, when we arrived in 2008, knife crime was rising very significantly. At the time, police officer numbers in London were an all-time high, and Gordon Brown was spending money like water on all the things that you've talked about. Now, we managed to get those numbers down against a background of cuts that we were making to the Metropolitan Police budget because we had to. The country was facing a financial crisis. And over the first 5 years of that term or so, crime fell. Now, obviously, things have to move, and crime is agile, and times change, and so we have to be as well. And what we're trying to do is design a package of criminal justice policies and capacity and capability that will deal with the challenges we face now. And they are very different to the challenges that were faced 10 years ago. Some of those, like the issue we've talked about rape, come about because of developments in the criminal justice system and developments in society. Others of them, like the growth in online fraud, are because of developments in technology. And what I think the British public want to see is a government which is committed and agile in that response, and that is what I think you'll see today on the conference floor.
Yeah, no one, least of all me, will criticise this government if they manage to improve the rape conviction rate. But it does rather feel that it has taken the rape and murder of a young woman by a serving police officer to give you all a kick up the backside to try and do something about this.
Well, again, while this is obviously a dreadful, dreadful event and it has encapsulated a feeling in the country, I think that's unfair too. The rape review, looking at this issue of the fall in rape convictions, was initiated 2 years ago to do a root and branch review of what was going wrong in the system. We're seeing the fruits of that work now. The Violence of Women Against Girls strategy was initiated, I think, 18 months ago, published in July this year, again, engaging with the sector to work out what we need to do. So there have been lots and lots of strands of work around this. But look, Neil, the fight against crime is never ending. And I think what the British people want to know is that we are dedicated, that we are bothered, that we are being industrious and throwing everything we can at it. And as I say, we are designing a system which can deal with the challenges of today, rather than argue about the challenges of a decade ago. And I think and hope that people will start to feel that in the years to come.